The moves that the Raiders have made so far in the new league year very much tracks with how Pete Carroll likes to build things brick by brick. That plus more on Tuesday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast for March 18th, 2025.
You are Locked On Raiders, your daily Las Vegas Raiders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome here, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. Definitely appreciate you for catching the show wherever you find your favorite podcast, or you're checking us out by way of the YouTube page. You know we appreciate both. The show grows each and every day. That's because of your consistent support and because of the job that my man Ari does behind the scenes on the YouTube page, making sure we look good and sound good each and every day. So we shout him out. We appreciate him. He's on Twitter at Ari Produces. You can hit me up as well at your boy Q254. And if you want to be a part of the show, we got the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line at 707-654-4693. Had a lot of feedback on Monday's show. No calls or texts on today's show. Had a really good interview on my radio show on Monday that I wanted to make sure I brought to the table. At first, I was just going to try to bring a couple little sound bites here and there, a couple clips, I like to call them. But no, as I went through it a couple times, I thought, you know what? I got to give him the full meal deal. So Danny O'Neill from DannyO'Neill.com, longtime Seattle Times writer, has been covering the Seattle Seahawks for a very long time. Actually had a really good article in the Seattle Times that goes all the way back to 2013, January 1st, 2013. And it was just something that happened to be floating around social media. I saw it over the weekend and said, you know what? Let me reach out to Danny O'Neill. He's not with the Seattle Times anymore, but he is with his own website, DannyO'Neill.com. He's actually going to be covering the Raiders and Pete Carroll this year as well. He's been covering Pete Carroll for a very long time. He used to do the pre and the post game show as a radio host when he was back in Seattle. He's in New York right now. So a lot of really good stuff. He gave us a lot of nuggets on my radio show on Monday about Pete Carroll, his expectations for him this year with the Raiders, and how he plans on building this thing brick by brick. I've referenced that a couple times as actually what the name of the article was. Again, going back to January 1, 2013. It's called Brick by Brick, How Pete Carroll Built the Seahawks. So I referenced the article in the conversation. You'll hear that in segment number 2 and segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Here in segment number 1, just news and notes of the day. The Raiders made at least one roster move and a potential another roster move that we'll jump into after I tell you about the title sponsor of the show, and that's FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So let's go ahead and jump into the news and notes. The Raiders re-signed Darnay Holmes to a 1-year deal. He's a guy that played 16 games with the Silver and Black last year. He had 3 pass breakups and a sack. He's a guy that's very familiar with Patrick Graham, both with the Raiders last season, obviously, and then going back to his rookie year when Patrick Graham was the defensive coordinator of the Giants, and they drafted Darnay Holmes. So he obviously has a lot of familiarity. I think he's a guy that's going to play a lot of the slot, or at least compete for that slot position with the leaving of Nate Hobbs, with him going to Green Bay by way of free agency. Darnay Holmes was able to slide into that slot position in 2024 when Nate Hobbs was out with the different injuries that he went through. Darnay Holmes stepped in a major way. So I think that he's going to be a guy that you're going to see as a really good factor, and like I said, a good guy that's going to compete at that nickel corner spot. He's a guy that can rush the passer. He's a guy that can pick off a ball, obviously, create some interceptions. His physicality is something that Pete Carroll has talked about multiple times when he's looking for in a player, the physicality, the passion for the game, guys that go out there and just leave it all on the line. That's what Darnay Holmes is, and that's what he provided for the Raiders last season while Nate Hobbs was out. So I do expect Darnay Holmes to have a major factor, a major role with this team. And again, another 1-year deal. All these deals that the Raiders are making with free agents and from outside the building, even their own guys, as like I said, a re-signing here with Darnay Holmes, all track with what Pete Carroll wants to do. Really wants to give these guys some short-term deals and then let them prove what they're going to earn, right? Let them go ahead and put it out there on the line, and then they extend them. You'll hear more about that coming up in segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. But the first piece of news, Darnay Holmes re-signed with the Silver and Black. Also, the Raiders hosted linebacker Christian Ellis. This is something that my guy Jordan Schultz, Fox NFL, he put out on Twitter. Raiders hosted linebacker Christian Ellis, a restricted free agent, on a visit. Ellis is 26, started 5 games for the Patriots, and is good in coverage and special teams. Received a 1-year, $3.3 million tender from the Patriots, who can match or decline any offer sheet from the Raiders. So the skinny on Christian Ellis, he's been around the league since 2021. The Vikings signed him as an undrafted free agent. Then he was with the Eagles, then the 49ers, then with the Eagles again, right? And then from 2021 to 2023, he was with the Philadelphia Eagles, New England in 2023, and then really played well with the Patriots in 2024. Played 16 games, as I mentioned, 5 starts, as talked about that at the top. Had 80 tackles, 1.5 sacks, a forced fumble, a fumble recovery, and an interception, and 5 passes defense. Now, we know that Robert Spillane and Divine Diablo both left for different places as far as free agents go. Spillane went to the Patriots. Divine Diablo went to the Atlanta Falcons. If Christian Ellis does not sound like a guy that Pete Carroll would love to get into the mix, and 1, he'll provide physicality, but 2, provide that competition. And the guy that has something to prove, right? I can see a 1-year deal, a 2-year deal possibly for Christian Ellis. Again, the Patriots put the tender on him, so they have the first right to refusal. But if the Raiders decide that they want to offer him a deal, the Patriots would have 72 hours to match it. If they don't match it, then the Raiders sign him to a deal, whatever that is. And if they do match it, then obviously the Patriots would sign him, and he would have to sign to their roster. But he's a very intriguing guy, only 26 years old. And again, another guy with something to prove, a guy who was an undrafted free agent, bounced around from team to team. If that doesn't scream Pete Carroll, I don't know what does, right? The competition, again, I know Raider Nation is going to get tired of hearing competition, but that's exactly what it is. So I would not be shocked at all if the Raiders offered him a deal if they saw what they like when they visited with them, and then it's the pressure's on the Patriots to decide what they're going to do. Re-sign him. They have 72 hours to make that decision. Couple more little notes here in segment number 1 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast, news and notes before we get to the conversation I had with Danny O'Neil on Monday. And Ted McMillan, the wide receiver out of Arizona, he's a guy that a lot of folks have talked about. A lot of people anticipate the Raiders could possibly be in play to draft him when the draft comes up at the end of April. He had his own pro day on Monday. It wasn't Arizona's pro day, but it was him. And so he had, and it's funny because there's kind of conflicting reports. There's a report that has him clocked in at 4.4840. He's 6'4", 219 pounds. That's a hell of a run for a big dude like that. Had 24 NFL teams in attendance to watch him. That was, again, according to my guy Jordan Schultz. But then Albert Breer said he was clocked in by multiple teams at a 4.54, 4.55, 4.57, which is obviously a lot different than a 4.48. But it's still moving for a guy that's 6'4", 219 pounds. He has big-time change of direction. He's a guy that's got big hands, can go up and get the 50-50 ball. He's not a burner. We know that, but he's a guy that can definitely play the wide receiver position. And for many people, he's the number 1 wide receiver in this upcoming draft. As a matter of fact, you heard a little bit of what Harry Douglas, former NFL wide receiver, had to say when he was a part of my radio show on Friday. You heard that on Monday's podcast. He also talked about the wide receiver position when I asked him, hey, this is not a deep draft when it comes to the wide receivers like it was a year ago. So who are some guys that stand out to you that the Raiders should have some interest in?
So number 1 for me, Teteroa McMillan. Man, the size, the strength, the ability to make crazy catches, to play inside, to play outside. I really like him. Luther Burton III, what he brings to the table, his explosiveness. I think last year it was more so the quarterback being injured. That's why his numbers were down. I will go with Matthew Golden. I really like the way he started to explode mid-year, toward the end of the year. Isaiah Bond got hurt. He had to step up and make plays, and we also seen him run that 4.29 from a 40 perspective. Trey Harris is another one of those guys. Big-bodied guy, can get those 50-50 balls, can be dominant in the run game as well. So those are a few guys that I really like in this year's draft.
So you see right there, he started with Ted McMillan, right? T-Mac, as they call him, Teteroa McMillan out of Arizona. Fantastic wide receiver. I do expect him to be the first wide receiver taken off the board in April, but the other guys that he mentioned, Burden and Golden from Texas, those 2 dudes are really good as well. So I could definitely see those 3 guys being boom, boom, boom off the board. Not necessarily saying in that exact order, but Ted McMillan is the guy that I do expect to see first and foremost off the board when the draft comes at the end of April. And that's really a position that the Raiders have not addressed yet, right? I mean, we know what they have brought to the table as far as, a running back, and Raheem Mostert got him on a 1-year deal. Alex Kappa put him at the guard position, brought him in as depth. Obviously have signed some guys as far as defense goes, but nothing yet at the wide receiver position, and there's not a whole lot of options, veteran options to choose from. So they very well could be in play for T-Mac in the draft, even as early as 6, right? I wouldn't be shocked and surprised at all if he's definitely in play, something to pay attention to, because, again, a wide receiver draft class that's not real deep he is, I believe, the best of the best when it comes to this year's upcoming draft. Real quick, before we get into the part one of my interview with Danny O'Neil, really good stuff on Pete Carroll and a little bit more, I want you to hear a little sound. I think it's a good preview for the interview coming up in segment number 2. It's a little bit of sound I found on social media, NFL Films, Geno Smith and Pete Carroll just kind of floating around, and it gives you a little bit of, like I said, a preview, a little bit of a taste test of what to expect and why Geno Smith was able to thrive under Pete Carroll in their time together in Seattle. Check it out.
Geno never gave up on himself.
Your relationship with Pete is a very special one. What is the thing that he's taught you the most?
He's given me that self-confidence. He's given me kind of a new lease on life.
Let's go. Come on. Nice and chill. Have fun playing ball.
I've always been a little hard on myself. I'm always like, you're not good enough, and but he helped me change the way I spoke to myself a little bit. Don't panic, don't panic. Nobody panic.
What he did is he allowed his voice to become the voice. In doing so, he just did everything exactly like you would hope he would do it.
Hey, I need you. I need you in the second half. I need you locked in. Hey, look, whatever happened, it's on me. It ain't never on you. And you got to get the ball, so I got to find you, all right? But I need you to give me your best in the second half, all right? Come on.
So I thought that was a really good preview. A preview of what? Well, a preview of the conversation that I had on Monday on my radio show, Unnecessary Roughness on Radio Nation Radio 920 with Danny O'Neil from DannyO'Neil.com, a longtime writer for the Seattle Times. He was also a radio host, did the pre- and post-game shows there for the flagship station of the Seattle Seahawks. So he got to know Pete Carroll really well. The conversation that you're going to hear, Part 1 coming up in segment number 2. Part 2 in segment number 3 is fantastic. So you're definitely going to want to stick around for that. Part 1 comes up next here on the Locked On Raiders podcast. Before I get to that, though, I do want to tell you about the title sponsor of the show, and that is FanDuel. As you know, March Madness is here. FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters, Cinderella stories, and even who's cutting down the nets. Right now, the women's bracket's out, the men's bracket's out. Good luck, right? I filled out mine. I do one bracket for each. That's it. I'm not doing 25. I'm not doing 10. I'm not doing multiples. I'm not playing the analytics. I'm basing it off the eye test, and that's it. Good luck, brother. Right? It's not always a successful challenge, but I have a lot of fun doing it, and you can do the same thing. Of course, with FanDuel, you can look at the spreads, the totals, game props, and a whole lot more. And the FanDuel app is simple to use. When you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com, get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Really excited about the conversation that you're going to hear. You'll hear part 1 here in segment number 2. Again, this is with Danny O'Neil from DannyO'Neil.com. That's DannyO'Neil.com. You're going to want to check this out. And he's a guy that's very informative when it comes to all things Pete Carroll and kind of what to expect. And so I saw his article over the weekend, Brick by Brick, How Pete Carroll Built the Seahawks. This article goes back to January 1st, 2013. So many, many moons ago. He doesn't even work for the Seattle Times anymore, but that's just how things live on the internet, right? So it's all good. I was able to find it. I was able to read it. And immediately I thought, man, I need to reach out to this guy and see if I can get him on the show. Luckily, I was able to work out. Our times were able to align, and we had a really good conversation. So part 1 of the conversation, we started off talking about the vision of Pete Carroll and how he goes about trying to build a roster brick by brick.
He certainly tries to foster a fresh start for everybody. And I think that that's one of the things that you'll see very clearly is that he's going to give everybody an opportunity, if he thinks that they can fit in with what they're doing, to kind of move forward with him. But I would also expect that there's going to be an awful lot of churn in the first year. That's certainly how it was in Seattle, of giving guys chances and seeing where they can get better and who it's going to work with and maybe who it's not going to work with, and not being afraid to turn things over. Pete is really good with younger players. And I think that one of the things that surprised me most about his time in Seattle was how aggressive he is about just trying to get that nucleus of young talent And then once they start to kind of click on all cylinders, it can turn pretty quickly.
So one of the things that stood out to me is the guys that they have signed from outside of the building as free agents. They're 1 year, 2 year deals at max. And, they're guys that have something to prove. They're guys that may be overlooked. That to me is, hey, we're screaming we're going to be all about competition here. And it sounds like that's exactly what he's going to do. And we should expect a lot more of that.
Yeah, that was a big part of what they did, especially early in Seattle, was they're going to use their draft picks, and that the veterans that they do bring in are going to be on shorter-term deals. And the thing that I thought worked best in Seattle was that they really, for the most part, didn't pay guys who were coming from outside the organization. They would give people a chance of, hey, come here and make a spot, and if it works, we will sign you long-term. But for the most part, I mean, their biggest free agent deals weren't their home run shots that they had. One of the bigger mistakes they made was trading for Percy Harvin, and that kind of ended up costing them Golden Tate. And I really do think that Pete wants to see, hey, we're going to give you the opportunity, and if it works, we're going to work really hard to keep you. I thought when they were building it in Seattle that you would see them be willing to let veterans walk away as free agents. Maybe it'd be Cam Chancellor or Earl Thomas or Richard Sherman, that they weren't going to constantly extend guys as much as they did, but they really worked really hard to, if they found a player that blossomed into a star, they worked really hard to keep those guys. And I would expect him to use that same formula along with John Spytak, what they're building there in Las Vegas.
When it comes to these guys agreeing to deals and they're not big money or they're not a lot of years, how difficult is that for a Pete Carroll to convince a guy that this is the right spot, even though it's not big money, which you see a lot of teams, especially in free agency, throwing at these players?
Yeah, it's different waves of free agency that you end up hitting. Obviously, the extension that they signed to Max Crosby speaks to how much Pete believes, and I can imagine how excited Pete is to have a player who plays with the effort level that Max does. But the other guys, you're not going to get – you're going to get guys who have something to prove. And honestly, that's the kind of player Pete works best with. If you think about the success, Richard Sherman's a great example. Richard Sherman came to Seattle with a huge chip on his shoulder. He was drafted in the 5th round, and he was really mad about it. And Pete, over the years – worked really well with guys who hadn't quite blossomed like the way that they thought they could. And then they get to Seattle, and in the environment that Pete is, I mean, Marshawn Lynch, he wasn't close to being out of the league, but he was a third-string running back in Buffalo. The Bills were sick of him. And he gets to Seattle, and he gets that fresh, clean start. And Pete does a really good job of getting guys to believe that he believes in them. And building a team. I think that's one of the very best things that he does is building the ethic of a team as everybody's starting from scratch.
That's the thing that stands out to me is getting a player to believe that the head coach, in this case Pete Carroll, believes in him. And I'll go to Geno Smith, right, a guy that we all thought was basically going to be a glorified backup the rest of his career. Pete Carroll gives him an opportunity. Obviously, he's given him another opportunity because he's traded for him to now be the Raiders quarterback. What is it that he saw in Geno Smith? How was he able to get the most out of Geno Smith when the rest of us basically wrote him off?
Yeah, Geno's a great story because Pete very much was about, hey, I believe in him. And I think the biggest challenge he saw with Geno was getting Geno to show that kind of faith and patience in himself. And there's a scene, I think it was Geno's second year as a starter with the Seahawks, where you saw him start to get really mad at a call that a ref had made. And Pete from the sideline looks at Geno, gets Geno to look at him, and then he did this gesture where he wiped down the front of his shirt, and it was a verbal, a gesture that the two of them had developed where Pete wanted him to let go of those sort of frustrations. And you saw Geno react to it in real time where he stopped being mad at the call and he flipped to the next play because, look, of all, Geno is his arm talent, and then he's quicker than a lot of people think in terms of his mobility, but he is he is upper tier in terms of athletes playing quarterback, what he can do with the ball and then his ability to move in the pocket. And I think it's always been the missing ingredient for him was sort of that confidence and security within himself. And Pete did a ton to build that. And in Seattle, I think Geno he hasn't talked about it yet, but I think it's pretty clear he was frustrated that the Seahawks didn't give him a vote of confidence in the past year or didn't give him the contract that really spoke to their long-term commitment to him. And so he's going to Las Vegas with the coach that believes in him, believing that, hey, this is going to be my opportunity to get the long-term job that Seattle really kind of hesitated to offer me. So I'm really excited. I think most people expect that there's going to be an extension, but even if there's an extension not done, I think that it's a great pairing of a quarterback feeling he's with a coach who really believes in him, who has a lot of years of good football left.
What is it about Pete that allows him to be this guy and be able to instill confidence in players that may not have it and allow him to give guys a second and a third chance and say, hey, you have a clean slate here. We believe in you and we trust in you. How is he able to push those buttons at the right time?
Pete's got a lot of discipline, and over the time I've covered him throughout his time in Seattle, first as a newspaper reporter and then as a radio host. And I did the weekly pregame interview that aired on the radio station's flagship. So I've gotten to know kind of his approach, his philosophy to football. And Pete doesn't believe in fear motivating guys. Or more accurately, he believes that if you have to threaten a player, either with his job or his playing time, there's always a limit to how hard that player will play for you. He'll play hard enough so you're not mad at him, so you're not screaming at him, so you're not telling him that you're going to cut him. But if that player believes that you believe in him and he believes in the team that you've put together, there's not a limit for how hard he's going to play for you. That Pete believes, and the thing that Pete's really disciplined about is that there's a lot of coaches who will say those sort of things, and then in quiet moments or when they're whispering to somebody, they'll complain about how so-and-so really isn't that good. Pete really doesn't do that. He only puts the best case forward for what he believes a player can accomplish. That can get confusing because there are times that guys do end up getting cut, and they're like, oh, my gosh, I thought he loved me. and there will be guys will get hurt feelings because of that. But the one thing that the consistency of Pete's approach in that way really does make guys buy in because they feel that he believes in them at a really deep level, and he does.
Part one of the conversation right there. That's some really good stuff. And again, as I was going through it, I'm like, all right, what can I cut out? What, maybe it was not that informative. It was all informative, right? It was all informative. It was a lot of really good stuff right there. I was really locked in on this. And it's funny, at the end of the interview, I told him, man, I could have talked with you another 30 minutes. Obviously, I'm not going to hold them like that. These guys don't get paid to come on the show. They do it, out of the goodness of their heart and giving up their free time. But, man, that was just part one. Really good stuff. So coming up in segment number 3, we'll continue the deep dive into Pete Carroll from Danny O'Neil, but really going to kind of have a focus on how he could build the Raiders, how he expects, like what's the first brick he expects to see laid down by Pete Carroll, and also some draft tendencies that we should be paying attention to as well since it is draft season. That's all coming up in segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown. Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup. Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free. It's your team every day.
Here we go, Raider Nation. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. No calls or texts today. We'll get back to that on tomorrow's show, of course, at 707-654-4693. But now it's time to deep dive into part 2 of the conversation I had with Danny O'Neil from DannyO'Neil.com talking about Pete Carroll. And again, if you want to reference his article that I read over the weekend, it's called Brick by Brick, How Pete Carroll Built the Seahawks from January 1 2013. So as we start segment number 3 and part 2 of the conversation, I reference his article from 2013, what he thinks the first brick that'll be laid by Coach Carroll will be. Check it out. Your article going all the way back to 2013, brick by brick. This Raiders team last year won 4 games. What are your expectations? How do you expect, what kind of bricks do you see him putting into place this year 1 with the Raiders?
Well, I think that you're going to see a big focus on a physical style of football. I think that the Raiders are more talented than the Seahawks were when Pete took over. And Max Crosby's an elite player. The Seahawks' best players, when Pete became their head coach, he even joked about it, was their kicker and their punter. Those were the 2 most established positions on the team. Now, they had a couple of high-end draft picks that they used. They got Earl Thomas in, and Earl had a rough first season, but was pretty talented, Russell Okung. But I think that you're going to see a lot of focus on energy and effectiveness. Look, I would not put it past Pete to have a team that wins 7 or 8 games in his first season. He is someone that is able to get results pretty quickly because guys do tend to play best. It's amazing. Even going back to USC, if you look at how many players who've played for him had their best seasons when they were playing for Pete, it's pretty remarkable. I mean, there was, for years, people would talk about, USC players kind of get overdrafted. They're not as good in the pros as they were in college. Well, that's a compliment to Pete. Guys like Richard Sherman, guys like Marshawn Lynch, even though things went sideways at the end, those were guys that had their best seasons under Pete. Earl Thomas. Yeah. Earl Thomas couldn't stick in Baltimore, but he had his best seasons under Pete. So I think that you're going to see a team that is going to play fast, is going to play hard. They're going to commit some penalties, but they are going to play and establish a physical style of football.
Yeah, he's reiterated that a few times. Physicality, being that smart team, but also physical and tough and passionate, right? Guys that really love to get after and play football, love the game of football. That was one of his non-negotiables that he told us at the scouting combine. If you love football, there's a place for you here. If you don't love football, there won't be. And that's tough to say to a professional, but it seems like that's what he's practicing what he preaches. That's what it seems like.
It does. And that is one of the things that I think can make it harder as guys kind of become older and play 5, 6, 7 years with the team, that I do think that there is some fatigue among them with the way he messages things. I think he's better with younger players or with guys in that first kind of 4-year window, but he really does bring a lot of energy. That it's not an act. Like the corniness, or even if it was hokey. I remember going out for their first OTA after he got the job in 2010, and he had them running bags where the guys kind of high knees over the blocking pads. And my reaction was, I didn't think I'd seen a team do that. I didn't think high school teams that I had covered back when I was starting as a reporter really did that. I thought it was hokey.
Right.
And there's a reason Pete does it. He wants guys to sort of get energy going. He wants them to start kind of waking up and get in charge of it, and people yelling at him and kind of getting fired up. He is fully committed to it. It's not an act. Like, he does believe in it, and the guys that buy in are going to have some of their best years, and there will be guys that roll their eyes. There was one, TJ Houshmandzadeh. I love Hoosh. Hoosh was a veteran who Pete inherited, and the very first team meeting he had, Pete had, okay, I want everybody to stand up and go sit in a part of the room that you don't usually sit in at this meeting. And it was get the defensive line to mix with the wide receivers. And there was one dude that didn't get up and move, and it was Hoosh. And like I said, I love Hoosh. I think he's incredibly entertaining. But he wasn't someone that was buying into the new Pete Carroll style. There was a little bit of an eye roll there. And Hoosh ended up getting cut before the next season started. And I think he's got some hard feelings and some feelings about Pete, but that's a kind of example of the guys who will buy in. There will be opportunities for them, but he's also not going to hesitate to cut the cord with a guy that doesn't feel like going in and being part of what they're building.
Not buying in. I can see that, and that's why, and you mentioned it before, all the turnover year one, they had so many different versions of that roster, and guys going from first string to second string to third string, back to first. How much did he turn that roster over in Seattle that first year?
I think the final total was over 300 roster moves in that from when they took over to when they finally, because they finished 7-9. They won the division because the division was really bad that year. They had a week 17 game against the Rams, but then they upset the Saints. But it was more than 300. I mean, I think there were 6 guys that they added after the final roster cut downs. So you set your team on that Saturday, and by the time guys showed up on Monday, there had been 6 guys that they'd added. So it was pretty extreme. And I think there was some thought that maybe they were a little too aggressive in that early going. But I honestly think that you're going to see something similar, that they are going to, you're going to see a lot of guys get opportunities as they try to figure out who are the kind of players that are going to fit into whose energy they like. And I do think that that's going to be an important part of it.
Well, sign me up for it. I want to see it. I want to see the stability that Pete Carroll brings, something that this Raiders organization hasn't had in a very long time. And Danny, will close out with this, and this has been fantastic. Is there any draft tendencies that you learned and you saw from Pete Carroll that we should kind of be maybe on alert about and pay attention to as he's entering his first draft season with the Raiders?
He doesn't use Twitter that much anymore. So I don't think you have to worry about the draft clues. When he was here in Seattle, he would send out these draft clues in the days leading up to the draft, and people would be trying to read into them to figure out what exactly they meant, and it was always just baloney. So that would be the first thing. If he starts giving out hints, just disregard those. He is going to want size and speed.
Okay.
They are a team. It is not about. He's not one of these coaches that wants his defensive tackle. Every one of them has to be 6'4", or don't bring him in the building. He's not someone who has hard, fast rules on physical specs for guys, but he wants size and speed. And in some ways, that ties into a lot of the Raiders' history.
Yeah.
And when they've drafted their best is an emphasis upon we want to be big and fast. And I would say to look for that. Is that he is going to want, if it's running backs, he wants a guy that's going to be a bigger back with some home run speed. If it's a pass rusher, they want guys that can corner, that can come around the edge, size and speed.
So hopefully you got the same feeling I did and understand why I couldn't just cut any of that out, right? I was like, man, I got to make an edit here, edit it. No, I'm just going to go ahead and read that bad boy in full. Obviously, we've done multiple dives into Pete Carroll and what to expect, and we've seen his history. We know what his track record is. But, again, hearing it from a guy that is as close to Pete Carroll as Danny was, I thought that was some really good stuff to bring to the table, especially when it's this time of year and you're seeing free agency and you're seeing guys being brought in. And you're seeing not a lot of money being spent, 1-year deal here, 2-year deal here. That's all part of the plan. As they say, that all tracks with what Pete Carroll is trying to do. And it's very similar to what he did in Seattle when he took over and he started to put that bad boy together. So hopefully they got you pretty fired up. They got me excited talking to him. Well, reading the article first got me excited. And then 2, talking to Danny got me really fired up about what's to come for the Silver and Black. And I definitely look forward to it. And hopefully you do as well. So you can always comment on what you heard. 707-654-4693. It's the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line. Talked a lot on my radio show about Geno Smith and how much better the Raiders are now that they've acquired him than where they were before they had him. When they only had Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell and Carter Bradley in the quarterback room, where they are right now with Geno Smith. And I think we all can agree that they're a lot better. Obviously, it's a very tough division, but we'll continue with the conversations. We'll continue with more news and notes, and we'll keep this bad boy rolling all week long as we do here daily on the Locked On Raiders podcast. So until tomorrow, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.